The laughter began before she even reached the table. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the grand ballroom as members of the city's wealthiest families exchanged amused glances. Hidden phone cameras quietly lifted from beneath designer handbags and tailored jackets, eager to capture what everyone expected would become the most humiliating moment of the evening. At the center of it all sat Ethan Blackwood, 32, billionaire, unmarried, feared in every boardroom he entered. Tonight, however, his own relatives had arranged something they believed even he couldn't escape. When the final invited guest unexpectedly cancelled, they insisted that the empty chair beside Ethan be given to a young hotel kitchen employee who had been helping backstage all evening. Emily hesitated before accepting. Her navy blue dress was elegant, but unmistakably modest beside the sea of custom-made gowns. She lowered her eyes as whispers spread across the room. There she is. They actually did it. This is going to be brutal. Someone laughed. Someone else pressed the record button. Emily reached the table, clearly wishing she could disappear. Then Ethan slowly stood. He looked at her for several silent seconds. Every conversation in the ballroom faded. Finally, in a calm, unwavering voice, he spoke only 7 words. "She's the only person worthy of this seat." Silence crashed over the ballroom. A crystal wineglass slipped from an elderly gentleman's trembling hand and shattered across the marble floor. His eyes never left the young woman. No one spoke for nearly 10 seconds after Ethan's words. The silence felt louder than the laughter that had filled the ballroom only moments before. Every guest stared first at Ethan, then at the young woman standing beside him. Emily looked completely overwhelmed. Her cheeks flushed crimson, as if she wished the polished marble floor would simply open beneath her feet. She had spent the entire evening helping the kitchen staff plate desserts and refill serving trays. Less than 15 minutes earlier, the banquet manager had rushed backstage, apologizing for an unexpected request. "A guest cancelled at the last minute," he had explained nervously. "The hosting family insists every seat at the founder's table must be filled. They asked whether one of our staff could step in temporarily." Emily had tried to refuse. She knew she didn't belong among billionaires, politicians, and corporate dynasties. But the manager looked desperate. "If we decline, they'll blame the hotel." She couldn't say no. She had borrowed a simple navy evening dress from another employee, tied back her hair, and quietly followed the hostess into the ballroom, believing she would simply sit through dinner unnoticed. She had no idea she was walking into a carefully planned humiliation. Across the room, several members of the Blackwood family exchanged uneasy looks. This was not how the evening was supposed to unfold. Officially, the annual Blackwood Legacy Gala celebrated another profitable year for Blackwood Holdings, one of America's largest investment groups. Newspapers described it as a charity gala. Those who belonged to the family's inner circle knew better. Every important decision was made during this dinner. Business alliances, board appointments, future leadership, even marriages. For generations, the Blackwoods had believed power should never leave the family. Ethan had become the only exception. At 32, he had transformed one struggling technology subsidiary into the most profitable company within the Blackwood empire. Investors admired him, employees respected him, financial magazines called him the future of American business. His relatives called him something very different, a threat. If Ethan eventually became chairman of Blackwood Holdings, decades of quiet favoritism, hidden financial arrangements, and inherited privileges would almost certainly disappear. He believed promotions should be earned. They believed loyalty mattered more than competence. The conflict had been growing for years. Tonight was supposed to weaken him. His cousin Richard had proposed the matchmaking gala weeks earlier. "Public image matters," Richard had told the board with an easy smile. "Shareholders like stable family leaders." It sounded reasonable. What Richard never admitted was that he had carefully selected nearly every guest seated around Ethan's table. People who enjoyed gossip, people who loved public embarrassment, people who would eagerly spread videos online if the evening became entertaining. When the invited socialite cancelled because of a delayed international flight, Richard saw an even better opportunity. Instead of leaving the chair empty, he quietly instructed the hotel manager to find someone unexpected, someone who obviously didn't belong, someone Ethan would immediately reject, someone the room would laugh at. He never expected Ethan to refuse playing his role. At another table, Richard tightened his jaw. "What is he doing?" he whispered. His younger brother leaned closer. "Relax. Give it 5 minutes. He'll send her away." But Ethan didn't. Instead, he pulled out the chair beside him. "Please," he said softly. Emily looked around, uncertain he was speaking to her. I don't think. You've been standing all evening." His voice remained calm. "You deserve to sit." For the first time that night, someone looked directly at her, instead of looking through her. She slowly took the seat. The room remained strangely quiet. Most guests had expected arrogance. They found courtesy instead. One elderly woman frowned. "He's performing." Another guest shook his head. "No, he doesn't fake respect." Across the ballroom, the elderly gentleman who had dropped his wineglass had yet to sit down. His name was Charles Whitmore, one of the original investors who had helped finance Blackwood Holdings nearly 40 years earlier. Age had slowed his movements, but never his memory. He continued staring at Emily with growing confusion. There was something strangely familiar about her face. Or perhaps, not her face. Something else. A tiny silver pendant rested just below her collarbone. It seemed ordinary, old, almost worn smooth with time. Charles narrowed his eyes. His heartbeat quickened. Where had he seen that pendant before? The answer hovered just beyond his memory, refusing to reveal itself. Meanwhile, Emily nervously folded her hands beneath the table. She could still feel hundreds of eyes watching her. "I really shouldn't be here," she whispered. Ethan turned toward her. "I disagree." She looked surprised. "You don't even know me." "No." A faint smile appeared on his face. "But I know something about character." Emily blinked. He continued quietly enough that only she could hear. "Most people reveal who they are by how they treat someone they believe has nothing to offer them." His eyes briefly scanned the ballroom. Tonight, a lot of people have introduced themselves. Emily followed his gaze. Around them, the whispers had already begun again. But this time, the laughter had disappeared. Dinner resumed, though no one seemed interested in the food anymore. Conversations became little more than whispers hidden behind crystal glasses and carefully practiced smiles. Across the ballroom, dozens of curious eyes remained fixed on Ethan and the woman sitting beside him. Emily kept her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had spent years learning how to become invisible. Working in luxury hotels taught her an unwritten rule. Guests noticed spotless tables, perfectly plated meals, and polished silverware, but rarely the people responsible for them. Being overlooked had become strangely comfortable. Being the center of attention felt unbearable. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ethan glanced toward her. "For what?" "For whatever this has turned into." She offered a nervous smile. "I think I accidentally ruined your evening." He almost laughed. "My relatives have been trying to ruin my evening for years." That unexpected answer caught her off guard. She looked at him for the first time without fear. "You don't seem angry." "I usually save anger for problems worth solving." "And this isn't?" He looked around the ballroom. "No, they're simply revealing themselves." Emily followed his gaze. Elegant dresses, perfect tuxedos, diamond necklaces worth more than most homes. Everything sparkled. Everything felt strangely cold. "I've never seen people work so hard to impress each other," she admitted. Ethan smiled faintly. Neither have I. A waiter approached with the next course. Emily instinctively moved her chair to help him set down the plates. You don't have to do that anymore, Ethan said. She shrugged. Old habits. When you've carried trays for years, you automatically make room. The waiter thanked her quietly before walking away. Ethan noticed something unusual. Every member of the serving staff who passed their table smiled at Emily. Not the forced smile employees gave wealthy guests. A genuine one. One young waitress discreetly squeezed Emily's shoulder before continuing toward another table. A chef standing near the kitchen entrance gave her a thumbs up. People trusted her. Not because of her title. Because of who she was. So, Ethan asked, how long have you worked here? Almost 6 years. And before that? Emily hesitated. I was in college. What did you study? Biomedical engineering. The answer surprised him. I thought you worked in hospitality. I do now. What changed? For a moment, she simply looked down at the tablecloth. My mother. There was no self-pity in her voice, only acceptance. She was diagnosed with kidney failure during my 2nd year. The treatments were expensive. My father had already passed away. There wasn't anyone else. So, you left school. She nodded. I told myself it would only be for a year. It became 6. Ethan remained silent. He knew what sacrifice looked like. But he also knew how rarely people made it without expecting recognition. Do you regret it? Emily thought carefully before answering. I regret that she got sick. She smiled softly. I don't regret choosing her. Across the ballroom, Richard watched their conversation with growing frustration. This is ridiculous, he muttered. They're actually talking. His brother leaned closer. People are starting to like her. Richard frowned. Then we changed the story. He quietly sent a text message beneath the table. Within seconds, several guests received it. The message contained a single sentence. Kitchen employee sneaks into billionaire gala pretending to be a guest. Almost immediately, phones began appearing beneath the tables. Whispers spread again. Emily noticed the change. Did I do something wrong? Ethan looked toward the nearest group. No. Someone else just did. He recognized manipulation when he saw it. He had spent his entire business career fighting people who preferred narratives over truth. This was no different. What if they're right? Emily asked quietly. What if I really don't belong here? Ethan answered without hesitation. Belonging has nothing to do with income. She looked uncertain. It has everything to do with integrity. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan asked something no one had asked her in years. If you could go back, would you finish your degree? Emily's eyes brightened for the first time that evening. In a heartbeat. What field? Tissue regeneration. You still read about it? She laughed softly. Every week. I borrow medical journals from the public library. I know that's probably strange. No. Ethan shook his head. It's impressive. She looked embarrassed. I'm probably years behind everyone else. Knowledge doesn't disappear because life interrupted it. Those words lingered in her mind. No one had ever said something like that to her. Most people only saw what she had lost. He was talking about what she still possessed. At the far end of the ballroom, Charles Whitmore continued studying the young woman. As Emily reached for her water glass, the small silver pendant slipped into the light once again. Charles froze. The engraving. It wasn't merely similar. It was identical. His breathing became shallow. A memory, buried beneath 15 years of time, suddenly stirred. Rain, sirens, a terrified little girl, a stranger kneeling beside twisted metal. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. It can't be, he whispered. Not yet. He still wasn't certain. But for the first time since entering the ballroom, Charles no longer cared about the speeches, the shareholders, or the Blackwood family politics. He needed to know one thing. Who was the young woman everyone had mistaken for the least important person in the room? And why did the smallest piece of silver around her neck feel more valuable than every diamond in the ballroom combined? Charles Whitmore could no longer remain seated. Ignoring the startled looks around him, the 80-year-old investor slowly rose from his chair. His cane tapped softly against the marble floor as he made his way toward Ethan's table. The conversations throughout the ballroom faded once again. Richard Blackwood frowned. What is Charles doing now? No one answered. Even Ethan looked surprised as the respected businessman stopped beside their table. "Young lady," Charles said gently, "may I ask you something?" Emily immediately stood out of respect. "Of course, sir." Charles pointed toward the small silver pendant resting against her dress. "That necklace. Where did you get it?" Emily instinctively touched the pendant. "This? It belonged to my mother." Charles's eyes narrowed. "Did she give it to you?" Emily nodded. "When I turned 18. She said someone gave it to her many years ago. It wasn't expensive, but she always told me never to sell it." Charles swallowed hard. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "Did she ever tell you why?" Emily searched her memory. "Only once, when I was little. She said it reminded her that doing the right thing doesn't always change the world, but it can change someone's world." Those words struck Charles like a bolt of lightning. He closed his eyes. Suddenly, the ballroom disappeared. 15 years earlier, rain had poured relentlessly onto a deserted highway outside Boston. A school bus carrying children had collided with a delivery truck. Traffic stopped. People watched. Few moved. Charles's granddaughter, only 8 years old at the time, had been trapped inside the wreckage. He remembered the panic, the screaming, the smell of gasoline. Emergency crews were still several minutes away. Then, someone had run toward the burning vehicle. Not a firefighter, not a police officer, just an ordinary young woman. Ignoring the danger, she climbed through a broken window and crawled inside. She emerged moments later, carrying a frightened little girl in her arms. Seconds after reaching safety, flames consumed the front of the bus. Charles had searched for the young woman afterward, but amid the confusion of ambulances and police reports, she had disappeared without leaving her name. The only thing he had managed to do was hand a small silver pendant to the exhausted woman before she vanished into the crowd. It had been intended as a token of gratitude. She had almost refused to accept it. Returning to the present, Charles opened his eyes. His heart pounded. Could it really be the same person? No. The ages didn't seem to match. Unless... He looked carefully at Emily again. "You said your mother gave it to you." "Yes." "What was her name?" "Sarah Collins." Charles slowly nodded. The name meant nothing to him. He had never learned it. But something else suddenly caught his attention. Emily's left wrist. A thin, pale scar curved just below the sleeve of her dress. Not large. Not obvious. The kind of scar left by broken glass. Charles remembered another image from that rainy night. The young rescuer had emerged from the wreckage with blood streaming down her arm after shattering a window to free the trapped child. His breathing became uneven. The coincidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Across the table, Ethan noticed the dramatic change in the old man's expression. "Mr. Whitmore, is everything all right?" Charles didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Emily. Finally, he spoke in little more than a whisper. I've been looking for your family for 15 years. Emily looked completely confused. "My family?" Charles gave a slow nod. 15 years ago, my granddaughter was trapped inside a school bus after a terrible accident. The ballroom fell silent. Every conversation stopped. I've spent years trying to find the people who saved her. Emily's brow furrowed. I think you have the wrong person. Charles smiled gently. I don't think I do. He turned toward the guests. That pendant was mine. I had it engraved after my wife passed away. There isn't another one like it. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Emily lowered her eyes to the necklace she had worn almost every day since turning 18. It was my mother's, she said softly. She never talked much about where it came from. Charles nodded. Then perhaps she wanted you to remember the lesson instead of the reward. For several moments, Emily remained silent. Then, almost as if opening a long-forgotten drawer in her memory, she spoke. I remember the accident. The words were barely above a whisper. I was 13. My mother and I were driving home after visiting my grandmother. When we saw the smoke, she stopped the car before anyone else. Several guests leaned forward. Emily continued quietly. I wanted to stay inside the car. I was terrified, but my mother ran toward the bus. I followed her. She unconsciously touched the faint scar on her wrist. The emergency door was jammed, so I climbed through a broken side window. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. There were children crying everywhere. I remember one little girl who couldn't unfasten her seatbelt. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely undo it. My mother lifted the younger children out through the window. I passed them to people waiting outside. Her voice cracked. I wasn't brave. I was just too scared to leave them behind. Charles closed his eyes. That was the detail. No newspaper had ever reported that 2 people had entered the bus. Witnesses only remembered seeing an adult woman carrying children to safety. No one had noticed the frightened young girl inside, helping one child after another escape. His granddaughter had told him about her many times. The big sister, she had called her. The girl with trembling hands who kept saying, "It's okay. We're getting out together." Charles opened his wallet with unsteady fingers. Inside was an old, faded photograph. It showed his granddaughter recovering in the hospital, smiling beside a handmade drawing. A child's drawing. A bus. A little girl with long, dark hair reaching through a broken window. Above the drawing, written in uneven crayon, were 5 simple words. "Thank you, brave big sister." Emily covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. I've never seen that before. My mother never told me. Charles smiled sadly. She never contacted us. She refused every interview. She disappeared before anyone could even learn her name. He looked around the magnificent ballroom. Tonight, many of you laughed because you believed this young woman had nothing worthy of admiration. His voice grew firmer. But before any of you knew her job, before you judged her dress, before you decided whether she belonged in this room, she had already spent 15 years carrying a quiet act of courage that most people in this ballroom will never equal. No one spoke. Several guests slowly lowered their phones. Others avoided looking at Emily altogether. Across the table, Richard Blackwood felt the mood slipping beyond his control. Recognition was replacing ridicule. Respect was replacing mockery. He clenched his jaw. If he couldn't destroy her with laughter, he would have to destroy her with something far more powerful. A lie. By the following morning, the gala had become the most talked-about event in the city's business circles. Not because of the charity auction, not because of the billion-dollar investment announcements, but because of a 7-word sentence. She's the only person worthy of this seat. Clips of Ethan standing beside Emily spread rapidly across social media. Millions praised his composure. Just as quickly, another video appeared. This one told a very different story. The footage showed Emily entering the ballroom from a service hallway, followed by carefully edited clips that made it appear she had deliberately approached Ethan's table. Dramatic music had been added. Anonymous captions accused her of staging the encounter to attract a billionaire. Within hours, gossip blogs repeated the same headline. Hotel worker schemes her way into Blackwood family gala. The timing was too perfect to be accidental. Ethan knew exactly what it was: a coordinated attack. He instructed his security director to preserve every version of the videos before they could be deleted or altered. "Find the original recordings," he said, "and don't tell anyone you're looking." Meanwhile, Emily returned to work as if nothing had happened. She scrubbed countertops, carried supply boxes, and prepared breakfast service while strangers whispered as she walked past. Some employees defended her, others avoided her. She had experienced enough hardship to recognize a painful truth. People often preferred a dramatic lie over an ordinary truth. Late that afternoon, Ethan visited the hotel through a private entrance. He found Emily organizing food donations that the kitchen planned to deliver to a neighborhood shelter. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "The reporters are outside." "I didn't come for reporters." He noticed several unopened envelopes on a nearby table. "What are those?" "My university transcripts." She smiled faintly. "I finally requested copies." He looked at her. "You still want to finish your degree?" "I've always wanted to. I just stopped believing it was possible." Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up one of the folders. The impossible has a habit of becoming possible when people stop listening to those who underestimate them. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future she had buried long ago. That future was interrupted the next morning. Blackwood Holdings held its quarterly board meeting. Every director attended. Major shareholders filled the observation gallery. Reporters waited outside. Richard believed he controlled the room. Before the meeting officially began, he activated the large presentation screen. "I regret that our family's reputation has been damaged," he announced. "The public deserves transparency." The edited video appeared once again. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard continued, "It is unfortunate that my cousin has allowed himself to become involved in what appears to be a carefully planned publicity stunt." He paused, letting the accusations settle. The company cannot afford leadership, clouded by emotional decisions. A few directors nodded cautiously. Richard smiled. He thought he had already won. Then Ethan stood. "I agree." The room became still. Richard blinked. "You agree?" "I agree. The board deserves transparency." Ethan connected a small encrypted drive to the conference system. The screen went black. Then a new recording began. This version came from the hotel's ceiling cameras. No dramatic music, no edits, only timestamps, only facts. The footage showed Richard privately instructing the banquet manager to replace the missing guest with someone nobody would expect. Another angle captured him laughing with two cousins, while one of them secretly positioned a phone to record Ethan's reaction. A third recording captured the exact moment Richard texted multiple guests immediately after Ethan defended Emily. Digital forensic analysts had reconstructed every deleted message. The words appeared clearly across the screen. "Make her look like a gold digger. We'll release the edited version tonight." Silence filled the boardroom. Richard's face turned pale. "This proves nothing. It proves intent," Ethan replied calmly. He clicked to the next file. A cybersecurity expert appeared in a recorded statement explaining how the viral video had been manipulated, frame by frame, audio layer by audio layer. Every edit was documented. Every missing sequence restored. Then came the final piece: financial records. Payments from one of Richard's consulting companies to an online media agency less than 12 hours before the first defamatory article appeared. No one spoke. One elderly board member slowly removed his glasses. "So, you manufactured a public smear campaign?" Richard looked around desperately. "No. This is being twisted." Charles Whitmore rose from his seat. His voice carried across the room with remarkable strength. I've invested in this company for nearly 40 years. I have survived recessions, hostile takeovers, corporate scandals. But I have never witnessed directors attempt to destroy an innocent woman simply because kindness interfered with their ambition. He turned toward the board. If this company rewards people like that, then it no longer deserves the name Blackwood. The chairman requested an immediate vote. One by one, hands rose. Not in Richard's favor, against him. The motion passed almost unanimously. Richard and the relatives directly involved were suspended, pending a formal investigation. As security escorted them toward the exit, Richard stopped beside Ethan. You've ruined this family. Ethan met his eyes without anger. No. You confused power with permission. And today, everyone finally saw the difference. The boardroom remained silent, not because Ethan had defeated his opponents, but because every person present understood the deeper truth. The greatest damage had never been caused by a young woman wearing a simple navy dress. It had been caused by people who believed another human being's worth could be measured by appearance, status, or wealth. That illusion had finally collapsed. 3 months later, the ballroom looked very different. The chandeliers still sparkled. The marble floors still reflected the light. The city's most influential people still filled the room. But something had changed. This time, no one whispered when Emily Collins entered. She wasn't wearing an expensive designer gown. She chose a simple emerald dress that reminded her of the promise she had made to herself years earlier, to remain the same person, regardless of where life carried her. The applause began before she reached the stage, not because she had become famous, not because she had become wealthy, but because people had finally learned her story. After the board's investigation, Blackwood Holdings established a scholarship in Sarah Collins' memory, honoring ordinary people whose quiet acts of courage changed lives without seeking recognition. Emily became the program's first director, while returning to university to complete the biomedical engineering degree she had once believed she would never finish. When the applause faded, Ethan stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. He looked around at the same society that had laughed only a few months earlier. Then he spoke. The joke was never about her. His voice was calm. It was about the people who mistook kindness for weakness. No one moved. No one looked away. We judged a woman by her dress. We measured her worth by her profession. We assumed that dignity belongs only to those with wealth. He paused. The only thing revealed that night was the poverty of our own assumptions. The silence that followed felt completely different from the silence on the night of the gala. Then, it had been shock. Now, it was reflection. Several guests who had laughed at Emily approached her one by one. None of them offered excuses, only quiet apologies. Emily accepted every one with the same gentle smile. She never reminded them what they had said. She never asked them to feel ashamed, because forgiveness, she believed, carried more strength than humiliation ever could. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan joined her on the ballroom terrace, overlooking the city lights. You know, he said, smiling, everyone thinks I changed your life. Emily laughed softly. They're wrong. They are. You already possessed everything that mattered before we met. I only happened to notice. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for seeing me before everyone else did. He offered his hand, not as a billionaire, not as the future chairman of an empire, simply as a man who respected the woman standing beside him. Emily smiled and took it. Inside the ballroom, hundreds of people watched in silence, not because they were witnessing the beginning of a love story, but because they had just witnessed something far rarer. The moment an entire room learned that a person's true value had never depended on beauty, status, or wealth. It had always been revealed by character. and character had been sitting in that chair all along.